Hey fellow Bat fans, and thanks for tuning in for the second video in our epic history on the character Bruce Wayne. In our last video we covered the inspiration and creation of the Batman character, along with his origin as well that everybody knows. But with the stage now set, we can finally dive into the history of the Batman comics and all the crazy adventures had there, with the first of two videos spanning the golden age of comics. So, the golden age of Batman starts with his debut in 1939 and goes to about 1956. However, the Batman that we see in these upcoming comics, most of us wouldn't recognize from the Batman that we know today. First of all, most of you people out there know Batman for having one of the greatest gallery of rogues out there. So, it's interesting to note that Batman's first recurring villain wasn't the Joker or any other familiar antagonist, but the fairly unknown mad scientist, Dr. Death, who was first introduced in Detective Comics issue 29. The truth is that the early adventures of Batman were mostly populated by your run-of-the-mill gangsters, along with the occasional mad scientist or mystic, such as the Monk or Professor Hugo Strange. However, the adventures against the Monk and Professor Hugo Strange, had the tendency to run towards the bizarre, with Batman having to deal with supernatural elements such as werewolves and vampires, or, on the other hand, monstrous scientific creations like giants and flowers with human faces. Yeah, you heard that right. Flowers with human faces. Sounds cute, right? No, wrong. They are terrifying. Look at them. Look at them. Scary. Now, that's not to say that Bruce wouldn't have bizarre adventures later on, including going back in time via hypnosis, or also going to the fabled Dinosaur Island, where he would get his robotic T-Rex that he keeps in the Batcave. But overall, they wouldn't come as often as they did in the earlier comics. Moving on, another difference that should be noted is the absence of Bruce's persona as a consummate bachelor. Instead, we are introduced to Bruce's actress fiancée, Julie Madison, in Detective Comics issue 31. However, she calls off the engagement by issue 49 due to Bruce's playboy lifestyle and his refusal to get a job. Also, it's kind of interesting to note that for someone who was trying to, keep his identity secret, he didn't always seem to think things through. Why do I say this? Well, that is, when Batman first started off, he didn't have a Batmobile. He just had a regular car. And now, generally that wouldn't be a problem, except for, first of all, it was bright red. And secondly, it was the same car that Bruce had been seen driving around in earlier. So, of course, no one ever points this out, and you start to realize why Gotham needs Batman, because apparently their detectives, they're not the brightest. Lastly, but most importantly, as Batman was originally written in the style of pulp fiction, the first comics of Batman show us a Caped Crusader who uses a gun. And while the famous Batarangs would be introduced later, it wouldn't be until Gardner Fox, who took over for Bill Finger for a few issues, got around to making them. So this Batman had little remorse over severely injuring or even killing criminals that he works to take down. And in his first adventure, the case of the chemical syndicate, that is, he actually kills the main villain, the murderous chemical company owner, Alfred Stryker, by punching him into a vat of acid. Now, because of this, in early strips, Batman had a terrible reputation, and the Gotham City Police were always trying to get him. Even Police Commissioner Jim Gordon, who, was actually a close friend of Bruce Wayne's. However, this portrayal of Batman started to soften by Detective Comics issue 38, when Robin, Batman's kid sidekick, was introduced. He was there to be the Watson to Batman's Sherlock Holmes. And in this story, we see how Robin came to be, as Bruce takes in an orphan circus acrobat, Dick Grayson, and trains him to become his new sidekick after his parents are murdered. The first issue of the solo Batman comic soon debuted afterwards, and introduced two of Batman's most famous villains, the first being the Joker, a homicidal maniac whose deadly poison not only killed, but left their victims with a disturbing grin on their face. Secondly, Catwoman, simply known as the Cat back then. She was a clever and seductive jewelry thief who attempted to seduce Batman into her life of crime. And though the Caped Crusader did not give in to her suggestions, he seemingly allowed her to escape. So these two characters would set the stage for the colorful and malicious characters that would go on to populate Gotham City. But there was also a story in which Batman shoots and kills some monstrous giants that were under the control of Hugo Strange. These two images, which show the deaths of the giants, one where the creature is hung from an early version of the Batplane, while the other falls much like the death in King Kong, didn't seem very heroic. So this resulted in the editor Whitney Ellsworth to decree that Batman would no longer kill or carry a gun, which, in all honesty, kind of made for a more compelling character. So, many other famous villains were introduced in the early 1940s. The first of which was the first iteration of Clayface, an ex-actor and makeup artist known as Basil Karlo. Simply a man out for revenge, Basil used his skills as a makeup artist to transform himself into a monster he played in another film in order to commit his crimes. Now, though this character only appeared once more, he provided the basis for a reinterpreted Clayface with actual shape-shifting abilities that came to light during the Silver Age. So we'll talk about him later. So the next of Batman's rogues to appear would be Jonathan Crane in issue 3 of The World's Finest Comics, where this teacher of psychology at a local university would don the identity of the Scarecrow for the very first time. While in December of 1941, the Penguin with his trademark umbrella and beak nose waddled in to make his debut, framing Batman for a thief, but was quickly outsmarted by the dynamic duo. Too bad he got away. However, back in the real world, the events at Pearl Harbor in the end of 1941 would catapult the United States into the war and in turn color the adventures in the pages of DC for years to come. Both Batman and Superman would go on to sell war bonds and fight wartime villains such as Adolf Hitler and Emperor Hirohito. The next big villain for Batman would be Bruce's former friend, Gotham City's District Attorney, Harvey Kent, though he was later renamed Harvey Dent so he wouldn't be confused with Clark Kent. In Detective Comics 66, Harvey was disfigured by mob boss Maroni, who threw acid on half of his face. He was driven mad by his horrific appearance, and the villain Two-Face was born. So this strange new villain had two minds about everything, and would determine his actions by a flip of a scarred-up two-sided coin, sometimes doing good, though mostly doing evil. By 1943, Batman had become a phenomenon and moved from existing to just in comic books to also having a newspaper strip and a 15-part movie serial, which we'll get to during our second half of this video, along with more Batman villain debuts and just how the creation of the Comics Code Authority would affect the adventures of the Dark Knight. So be sure to stay tuned.